Welcome to the second episode of To Be Determined, where I continue my conversation with Jason Liebig. Sorry, Jason, I called you Liebig in the first one. I've only known you for, 17 years, and I still don't know your name. Where he picks up where we left off, just joining Marvel Comics. We're going to see him go through that job, which is really interesting, and then continue on to other projects more candy related, and we kind of catch up and see where he's at now and where he's trying to get to. So, buckle up because once again, Jason has a lot of great stories, and you're hopefully going to really enjoy them. I'll see you at the end. So, when we left you, you just moved into the editorial department
Yeah.
of Marvel,
Yeah.
working on X-Men, which
Yeah.
was their biggest book at that
Oh
point?
yeah. No,
Or
it had been their biggest book at that
books?
point for like month on, month off for at least probably 10 years at that point. They were the biggest books in comics, I think, right then. Yeah,
Now,
and they
what,
had been.
where were we at with Marvel movies? When did the first X-Men movie come
First
out?
X-Men movie was 2000, I think, or 99. 99 to
Okay,
2000. I think it was
so
2000.
we're a few years before
Years
that.
away. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you show up, and what do you do for your job?
Well, that's a good question. At first, it was like a lot of jobs. You photocopy a lot of things, right? You're
Okay,
sending copies of things. You're getting at that point everything was FedEx. Like the editor's job at Marvel at that point, you could start your day. Mark always got in early. He got in like Mark Powers, the senior editor above me. He would get in like at 8 a.m. and like have a coffee, have a bagel or whatever, because you wouldn't get in your FedEx until like 9:30, 10 a.m. And then when you got in your FedEx in the morning, you were getting things over to be scanned. If there needed to be corrections or whatever, you'd find out how much art came in. Like Joe Madureira, no more art from Joe. Why don't we have art from Joe? Sort of like early on, Joe was like so slow, but amazing. And you'd start making phone calls. But as an assistant, you'd look over things, you do things the editor wanted you to do. You sort of, you could do a lot of different things. I told you how excited I was, and it was great to work on those books, but I had this really unique situation. Bob Harris had like a corner office. It wasn't a great corner office, but it was a corner office on editorial row. But in that office, he still wanted to keep his hands on the X-Men because they were still the most important books Marvel was
sure,
publishing.
sure.
And he cared about them. I think it was his ego, it was desire. I love Bob. He cared about those books. He'd helped turn them into something bigger than they had ever been. So Bob sort of, if this is the office, Bob sat here. Mark literally sat right next to him. And on the other end of the office, next to the bookshelf, I sat there. So I shared an office with the editor-in-chief for the first year and a half to 2 years I was there. And so I ended up sort of Bob had his own assistant. He had like an administrative assistant who sat outside to answer phones or do administrative things.
Wait, so you guys are all in the same room?
We shared an office, yeah. So what's amazing about it is there were a lot of times he would close the door because he didn't want people walking by to hear his phone calls or whatever. But I was still in the room. So I'm hearing he's on the phones, like some of my favorites are like he's on a speakerphone call with Stan Lee, right? And Stan's, it's like whatever. This was a couple of years later. This wasn't right at first, but I'll never forget
Sure.
during Heroes Reborn when Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld had negotiated with the current president of Marvel to take away a lot of the superheroes and do them themselves. And they were talking about all this stuff. There was a rumor going around, which no one's ever really fully vetted, but we tried to hire this guy who had been working on some Wildstorm books. We wanted him on X-Men. And I can't remember who it was, Dave Finch or somebody. Anyway, but he said, listen, he goes, the editors at Wildstorm are telling me not to take on any X-Men work because they're going to have the X-Men in 6 months. Those are like, they had the Heroes books, and then they're going to get all the rest of the Marvel books. So I'll never forget. I guess I can say the Stan's gone, so I'll never forget. Bob's talking this over with Stan. They're just discussing it, sort of kibitzing a little bit. And I'll never forget, it was this great story. It's like, listen, he goes, we're trying to get talent, and Jim Lee is taking the money that Marvel's paying them to keep people from working for us, and it's like, and that now there's rumors going around. They're saying that they're getting the X-Men next, so guys don't want to come and work for us. I'll never forget in Stan Lee on the speakerphone, I'm sitting there trying to pretend like I was working, but all I was doing was freaking listening, right? I'm just like, no. He's like, Bob, fuck Jim Lee, and it's just like, So things like that, and seeing how the business is run, because there were so many bad things. I think Bob got a bad rap at that point. And, I'm sure, there were things I'm sure he did that can arguably be said weren't fair or whatever, the best choices. But by and large, I saw that guy protect all of us from a lot of horrible, ugly things happening at this corporate level, where we had different presidents coming in and protecting, like the Heroes Are Born deal at a certain point became a very bad deal. And because an executive was in charge of it, like a corporate executive, they said, play nice, like with Rob or whatever, where Rob was using our money to poach our talent, which was crazy stuff. No offense to Rob. I mean, Rob was just trying to do the best thing he could.
Sure.
I don't want to portray him as a villain, which too many people do. But we, contractually, we were like, well, they're in violation of our contract, because they said their contract was like, they can't hire any of our people. And they were literally hiring people off of our, like, teams off of our books, at least one of them. So that became a point of contention, but it was protected. It was frustrating. So he dealt with all that stuff. But yeah, so there was this crazy thing for a young guy, young professional in the world. I had such a perspective of the sort of goings on of Marvel Comics, both as a creative entity and as a sort of business entity. It was fascinating. And also just the guys who came in, it's like, who was it? It's like John Buscema came in once, and so John Buscema is like telling stories. And so the people would come through, and, you got to see these people, you got to meet a lot of people. I worked with people that I loved, just people I was crazy about. So there were just fabulous opportunities. I'll never not love every one of those memories, because they were magical, and there was a lot of stress at the end, and a lot of anger and politics and everything else. But, to me, those years at Marvel are a treasure, and it's you can't take away. So I loved it.
What did you have? 5 years you were at Marvel?
Yeah, I'd say just probably under 5 years, but just, I always say around 5 years.
Now, how did that sort of working at Marvel, being like seeing that sort of creative process that sort of is super creative, but also has this sort of corporate push down on it and necessity, how did that affect you? Sort of, did you, because I know you've had creative pursuits yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
You've worked on stuff, and did that make you more interested in trying to pursue some stuff like that, or did that sort of sour you?
No, I don't think it soured me at all. I think it just made me more aware. And again, at that point, I just saw the opportunity of it all. I saw people having incredible opportunities. Like even as an editor, I could hire someone who no one had ever heard of, and a year later, they were a star at a convention. And it was great to see. It was great to give people those opportunities, and I saw people's lives changing by giving them the right opportunity. And I thought, wow, that was one of my favorite things as an editor. Dealing with fans was one of my favorite things, and then really dealing with creators and giving them certainly young creators, giving them opportunities that would change their lives. That's a great thing to be able to do.
Now through these 5 years or so, you're going to all the conventions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I went mostly to less. I went to less as an editor than I did because the marketing guy was going to all of them. But as an editor, I started going to a fair amount. Yeah, so I was still going to probably San Diego every year, certainly, and probably a few Chicagos. But there were probably a couple I missed. Yeah, but a lot of conventions.
Okay. And whilst you were doing this, what happened with your collecting and sort of that whole aspect of your existence?
The funny thing is, as a comic book collector, I wasn't really buying any comics. But here's the magical thing. When you work at one of those companies, there is a comp list. So I was getting so many comics for free. I was getting, even when I was a lowly marketing rep at DC Comics, they had an exchange program. The publishers had an exchange program.
Yes, I've heard of that.
So I would get, as a regular, even my first job in comics, I got every comic that DC published and every comic that Marvel published. And I think when I was at DC, it was
every month.
Every month.
Just how would you get this?
There would be, it would come through the mailroom. I think they would sort them and they would put them into stacks, and everybody would get a bundle with their name on it. Yeah, bundled up probably in rubber bands or something. But and it was, of course, if you loved comics, you just, you were in hog heaven because you were getting every single comic. You weren't missing anything. Then you weren't necessarily getting all the dark horses, or all the images, I don't think at that point. But if you're Marvel and DC, you got them all. And there were a lot of bad, dumb comics and a lot of that stuff. There was a lot of trash. And then there were occasionally things, because even I never stopped being a collector when I was doing all this. I was still collecting toys, and trying to do that. I was having action figures up in my office. But so, boy, if you loved comics, which I did, I just got tons of comics, and so many comics that I literally didn't know what to do with them.
And
But I
what
was,
did you do? What did you do? I mean, literally, you'd get this stack
yeah,
every week or every month?
it was probably once every couple of weeks.
Every
Yeah, I
couple of
feel like,
weeks, you
yeah,
get
every couple of
this,
weeks.
you
I
bring
think
it home.
at one point I had my apartment. I literally did not have a box spring for my bed. I literally just had long boxes of comics that I put a box spring and a mattress on top of, like
There
a
it
crazy
is.
person. And then maybe when I was still in the business, I had a friend who owned some stores, because when I was a retail rep, I met all these great retailers around the country. And so I made a lot of friendships with comic book retailers that I never would have met otherwise. And so a guy from Pittsburgh came up and bought like a bunch of my comped comics that I gotten over the years. But the best thing for the comp comics, besides the regular comp list, I think when I was at DC too, the crazy thing about DC, you would get like the hardcovers, you got the, and then like when they were doing a lot of trading card sets of Skybox, you would get a master set of trading cards with like all the special chase cards. So I'll never forget, we did Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I had this like set of, I don't know, Batman cards, but with all the hologram or whatever kind of premium cards that had in it, which, whatever, was worth a bunch of money. I went to this card dealer who had this set of Star Wars cards from like Australia, this rare set of 1977 Star Wars cards. I think they were Scanlons or something like this. But I was like, oh, how much of those could I trade them for this? And he said, sure. So I traded this thing that DC gave me, which I thought was just great. And I got this great set of like very exotic Star Wars cards, which I loved. I also like, it's safe for me to say this now because it's been like 27 years. One of the great things about being the marketing guy when I was at DC Comics, you had a key to the premium closet, which is where they kept all their platinum editions. And I'll never forget, we made a lot of platinum editions, but there was still a couple boxes of platinum Superman, which at that point people were selling for a couple $100. So I would like occasionally go in there and peel a few off and like trade them to my friends. Like my brother, I think, traded a couple of platinum Superman for like a Randy Bowen Death Dealer, Frank Frazetta Death Dealer statue, and all this crazy stuff.
Which is probably worth a lot more money than those Supermans at this point.
So, but when I was at both companies, one thing that I found fascinating were the foreign editions of comics, where they would license to foreign publishers and release them. Sure. So it was a lot of the same cover art, but all the language was different. Sometimes the logos were translated, but they were all translated in a different language. I thought, well, these are really interesting and cool. And I would because the only way to get them is to go overseas. But if you're friends with someone at the office, they get all the stuff in. So I would literally make friends with them. And well, I was friends with them. It wasn't transactional. I was friends with everybody.
It wasn't a scam.
Yeah, it wasn't a scam. And I'd say, hey, can I go through the rack of stuff you just got in? And I say, sure, take whatever you want. So I ended up creating a small collection of foreign edition comic books. And then I did the same thing at Marvel when I was there. But when you worked in Bob Harris's office, Bob got everything because he's the editor-in-chief. So he got Dark Horse, he got Image, he got prestige format hardcovers, $80 books. He got them all, and he didn't give a crap about any of them. Like he didn't have like a comic book collection. So I'm like, hey Bob, can I take your $80, Dark Knight special? It's like, whatever, you can take it all. It's fine. So then the collection got even bigger because that was going on and on and on. And then there were crazy days like, if you were a collector, and I always was, and this is before eBay, we had like office clean out days at Marvel. And this is going to, like, for some collectors, this is crazy. Like,
people are going to start crying when they hear this story.
It's not crazy stuff, but people would like put things out on these tables to throw out or whatever. I'll never forget, like, they did these stupid Charles Xavier class rings someone made. They were made like by real class ring people, so like $30 to $70. But there was just a bucket of them. So I'm like, I did like, Green Lantern. I grabbed like a bunch of those. So I had like a bunch of class rings. But the coolest things I think I got were the 3-color seps on the little plastic sheets. They would do our covers and stuff. They did like a Jim Lee XMen cover thing that was part of like a poster, but then someone had that in their office from production. They were just throwing it out. So I'm like, well, I'll take that. I think my brother has it framed in his office now or something. So this was stuff they were throwing out. And I was like, oh, I'll take that. So it was like trash was exciting,
Trash was exciting.
And when I was at DC, one thing I also saved was we would get on all the promotional posters because I was sending them out. I was putting promo posters into packages and sending them out to retailers. They were all folded so they could go in the box. But we would also get like usually one slat of flats, unfolded
Sure.
posters. And I would always go down to the poster person. Oh, can I get a flat just for me? She said, sure. And I would do that every few weeks whenever we get new ones. Oh, can I get a flat? She's at one point she comes to me, and this is funny, just because of conversation. She goes, hey, I'm getting ready to clean out my files. Do you want to? Because I'm going to throw all this stuff out. Do you want to go through these all things? And I got 2 big bundles of flat posters. A lot of them were folded, but DC promo posters, because this was 94. DC promo posters going back to like 80. So I've got like Watchmen promo posters, just some stuff like the Camelot 3000, posters, just crazy stuff. And, it's like it was all going to go in the trash, and I'm glad I saved it. They're not really worth anything, but they're just neat.
Hey,
they're cool.
And all the stuff you kept, it's not in your tiny apartment in New York. It's like
most of that stuff is back in Nebraska. Yeah, my mother's been
Nebraska.
She's been very gracious with letting me keep an archive back there. Yeah, my brother has some of it, but a lot of it still resides in like my mother's house. Yes.
So there's like an attic full of all these miscellaneous. So
there's literally so many posters there. Yeah, it's crazy.
So we get done with Marvel.
Yeah.
1999 or so.
It's 2000. It was like 2000. 2000. Yep, right before election.
Which is 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Where do you go from that?
My initial job, I left, and one of my writers had just sold a film to a film company. I think they were called Distant Corners, and he told their executive, their founder, whatever, a guy named John Hegeman, who had come from like Orion Pictures or something. He was starting his own film company. He was the guy behind the Blair Witch Project. So he was starting a genre, film, animation, everything company. However, and so we met, we interviewed. He was going to hire me on as a producer, one of his New York City producers, to develop film, animation, comics, web stuff. And it was really great because he also said, look, if you've got your own ideas, you want to write, that's separate from your contract. So it was very exciting. It seemed like, oh, wow. And for me, this was like, everything seemed like, oh, look, I'm going to be a bigwig, like my job career was sort of steadily going up. I was a marketing rep. I was an assistant editor, full editor. I'm working on the XMen. Now I'm going to be a film producer. Oh, okay. Like it didn't quite work out, but it was very exciting. So what had happened was I had interviewed for about probably 6 weeks, met different people there. They had sort of like a late 90s, early 2000s, open format office. It was during the first internet boom. Very exciting. I'll never forget. I went to, just to put into scope of how crazy it was, Sci-Fi Channel launched Sci-Fi Online. And I think Sci-Fi Online had like either 200 or 500 employees for their online department. Yeah, that was. And so they had this gigantic launch party with a famous DJ. I didn't know anything about it, but I went to this gigantic party with celebrities and free booze. It was insane. It's huge space, like probably 1,000 people there. It was nuts. So the internet was booming, but it was about to bust, and it actually started to break already. Like the wave had started to break by December of 2000.
Oh, okay.
So I accepted my offer. I go back home for Christmas. I'm out seeing some friends from college, from high school. It's like, yeah, I'm going to be like a film and television producer. It's ridiculously exciting. I'm so happy. And I come back. I'm supposed to maybe move into my office in February or end of January. Like end of the first week in February comes, and I haven't heard from anybody. And I called John, and I was like, hey, John, it's Jason Liebig. I left him a voicemail. 3 days later, I call back. He says, yeah, he goes, I got some bad news. He goes, I have to rescind the job offer. He goes, we're going into contraction mode. So I was like, I come back, and thinking this is going to be, and I was, don't get me wrong, I was terrified. I was like, I don't know how to be a film producer. I don't know how to be a television producer. But,
sure.
But I was excited and scared, but it was all those sort of things you want it to be. Like you're jumping in water, it's too deep for you. But yes, you have to retract the job offer, and I'm like, and that sucked, and it was terrible. But it was true. I mean, I would find out from my friend who still had a film in development with them, which would later be released. Because I think they folded within 2 months, they folded the entire New York City office. They had an LA office as well, but they had 2 active producers there working on projects. Those guys got folded into Sony Classics Pictures, I think, because they had some kind of relationship with Sony Classics at that point. So that that happened, and I was sort of like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. And I had friends who worked at Sony Pictures. I had friends that worked at Sci-Fi Channel. So at a point, I was like, I'll go out to Los Angeles. And I went out to I had some friends in Los Angeles. I said, maybe I need to move to LA.
Oh
And
wow.
I went out to LA and spent, well, it must have been like 2 weeks out there, sleeping on a friend's couch, sleeping on a couple friends' couches. And I met with my friends at Sci-Fi. I met with my friend at Sony. And what it really looked like was, coming from where I was coming from in comics at the time, if I was going to get a job at Paramount or Sony, or it was going to be through their sort of publishing divisions. And everyone was gutting all that stuff, all their online, because everyone had hired so many people for online publishing, and everyone was just gutting all those departments right then. So there were no opportunities for me. I was on the phone with a friend of an ex-girlfriend, and she was like, oh, why don't you go back and try to be an actor back in New York City? Because you always talked about that. Because I was like an actor in college, high school. And I was like, oh, it's ridiculous. I like it. I'll do it. And I went back to New York, and that's when I started pursuing that. And and then that sort of led me into a couple different places. And I'd say two things sort of started to wedge my worlds back together. One was finding your book on that day off, and the other one, and then the other one was I was up for a gig at Spike TV, if you remember Spike TV.
Sure.
They were trying to launch a geek show, and this was before Chris Hardwick and the Nerdist launch or anything else.
Oh wow, pre-Nerdist. Wow.
Yeah, and they had a thing called Geek Ray Vision, which I thought was a pretty cute name. And it may have not even been Geek Ray Vision when I first auditioned. And it was one of these things where you go in, and the first time, I had a manager, it was like a mother of a friend who'd managed like Julia Roberts at one point. So I had someone sending me out on auditions, which was great. I had representation. And I'll never forget, I go up to Spike, and the first time you go in, there's like 10 pages of names, right, signing up. And I went in, I did my thing, and of course, I was probably, because geek culture had not become mainstream. So these actors and hosts were going into audition. They didn't know about like who Captain Mal was. You know, they knew Captain Kirk, right? You know, I was like, oh, sure. I watched all that stuff. I love Joss Whedon. So, so I go in and I sort of nailed it, right? I was myself. I was fun. I improvised with the producers a little bit, you know, and asked me questions, and it went well. And then I got called back, and then it was like a page or two of names, and then I got called back again, and they're giving you more challenging things to sort of do, giving you things, and you sort of riff on them. And I'll never forget, it came down to the very last time they had me in, it was just me and two other guys on assignment. That was it. So they had gotten it down to me and these two other guys, but these two guys were a team. They were a musical comedic duo. And, you know, I'll never forget, because I'm sitting right across from these guys. They've got their fucking guitar cases and shit. I'm like, eh. But I go in, and of course, they love it. What was one of the questions they asked me? This was probably in an early interview. They said, okay, we've got a machine gun, like a long sword, or a flamethrower, right? You know, it's like they choose one of three, right? And I think, which sounds so dopey now for me saying this, but I'll never forget. I said, well, if it was me, I'm going to take a machine gun with a sword on the front and a flamethrower racked underneath. And I'm just going to, and they were all cheering and everything. So I was like, oh, that's amazing. Which again sounds pretty low hanging fruit to me right now, but like it got me a lot of, you know, good kudos. So I then get a call. That was probably on a Thursday or Friday end of the week. I get a call like on Tuesday from my manager. She says, well, they love you, you know. And I was like, well, I know that at this point. They've had me back like half a dozen times. And they said, but they offered the job to the other guys. I was like, ah. But those other guys are on tour, and they want to start shooting next week. So they said, those guys are trying to get out of their tour dates. And if they can't get out of their tour dates, this is your job. And I was like, okay, but they got out of their tour dates. Yeah. And, you know, I watched their show. I watched their version of the show. And I thought, oh, like the first episode, they have him go out and talk to Mike Richardson at Dark Horse Comics. And they're not asking him good questions and everything. And I was pretty, at this point in my time in that world, I was pretty clear about what I could and couldn't do, what I was good at, what I wasn't good at. I was like, oh man, I'm better at this than they are. I know I am. But at the very end, they together, like improv comics do, they wrote a song about what everything was in the episode. And I was like, it was amazing. Like that was
the selling point. They brought that
like,
to it.
It was so good. I was like, they should have had us, all three of us, do it. We could have been a team. I could have done some of the interviewing. You know, it would have been great. But there you have it. So, and then that sort of made me want to get into more stuff like that, which had me sort of going back to my collector roots. I was I wasn't collecting that much, but I think then it might have been even after that I got your book and I started collecting a little more. And
And
then,
and then you started. I was looking because you started
yeah,
the blog. It looked like in
2012.
2012,
Yes.
and it was interesting because looking at the blog, you start with
Big
the
League
bubble
Chew.
gum,
Yep.
Big League Chew, and then you
Yeah.
have a hot tamale, and then you had like a third thing that was like one of your primary.
Probably bottle caps or something. Who knows?
No, it was a
Yeah.
bottle. Oh, it was the marathon bar,
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Yes.
which are kind of your three
Those are my
obsessions.
anchors. Yeah.
Now, what what was the deal with, like, what was the auspices for the starting of the blog, and where is that kind of gone?
Well, it's the auspices, and I apologize for telling a long story, but when I first started buying things, like when I was looking, after I'd gotten your book, I think the first thing I really started to collect because they were available on eBay is I was more of a cereal box collector, right?
Sure.
There was a lot more cereal. There wasn't much candy out there, but I
No.
would buy it. And as you have humorously brought attention to it once before,
Uh-oh.
no, like I was an obsessive scanner, right? I was trying to, because I wanted to archive
Yes.
things, right? I was scanning things and sharing them on Flickr, which is how I met you and a lot of other theses. We were all on Flickr. So I was
Oh,
scanning
is
things.
that how we actually met, was on Flickr? I don't.
Maybe I may have gotten in touch with you before
You
Flickr.
probably
Yeah,
contacted me
yeah.
somehow.
But
But
at a point,
before Instagram, there was
yeah.
Flickr, which
Oh yeah,
people don't know because Flickr's very much changed. There
yeah,
was a whole sort of community of collectors, and we would all sort of post our latest finds on there, and
yeah.
that went on for years and years and
Oh
years.
yeah,
And then at a certain point, Flickr changed how everything worked, and it became garbage.
yeah.
At least for what we
Well,
were
for
doing,
what we were
because
doing, yeah,
yeah, because we would post and comment very, very similar to what Instagram does now.
yeah,
And it was a very social, very interactive, and then they sort of changed it so that became less relevant. And
yeah,
some of us, I've switched over to Instagram.
yeah,
You do a lot on Instagram at this
yeah,
point.
for sure. Yeah, that's my main outpouring of this material. But
Yeah,
so I was
cereal
sharing things.
boxes.
Yeah, I was buying cereal boxes. I was scanning things. Of course, I was also scanning even before that. I was scanning like the stickers. I was trying to put out stickers on this one Foot Locker as a gift for my brother, like a nostalgic gift. And it was all this trying to find these things and put them together. But so I was posting cereal boxes, and I would eventually become a candy collector. I sort of decided to get into it, but it was a fateful collection. Um, I had bought a couple cereal boxes from a guy. One of them was a Quangaroos box, maybe like a
Oh,
Quaker
okay.
Quangaroos box, or Quake, one of the later ones, one of the easier ones. Anyway, um, I bought them from a guy, and at that point, it was very easy to talk to people on eBay. You could even
Sure.
find out who was bidding against you. But anyway, so I emailed the guy because I was always interested about the stories behind the things, right? So I was like, "Oh, why do you have these old cereal boxes?" Right? It's like, are you a collector? Did you find them? Whatever. And because sometimes, look, I love the stories, but sometimes it would also lead to more stuff. So he's like, "Oh, I'm a sculptor." And he goes, "I really like these things." I said, it's like, when I'm deciding to move, I never thought I'd sell them, but I'm moving to Japan because I want to study sculpting over there and all this stuff. And I said, "Well, that's cool." I said, "Listen, if you ever want to revisit them, I'm going to scan them at high res. I'm going to post them to Flickr so you can check it out. Here's a link to my Flickr." Right. And at that
Ah,
point, I'd been posting whatever few things I could find. You could occasionally find a few things. I feel like over the last 8 or 9 years, it's been a lot more. Certainly over the last 5, it's been a sort of bountiful period. But he comes back to me with this great email, which I was already pretty close friends with you, Dan, at this point, because he emails me back. He says, "Listen," he goes, "I really loved your Flickr. I see you've got some candy in there. My father, his father's one of the most famous tiki sculptors in the country. So my father saved a lot of old packaging, mostly candy packaging, when he was growing up, and he has it. Would you be interested in it?" And I was like, "Well, sure." So he starts sending me photos of this stuff, and it's basically a suitcase just full of wrappers, late 60s, early 70s, things I'd never seen, things I'd been looking for before, things I didn't know that even
he
existed.
was up in like San Francisco, I think, right?
San Francisco, maybe then, but I think now he's up in Portland. But I think he might have been up
Okay.
in San Francisco at that point, or was from there.
Because there were a few
Um,
things that were sort of
oh yeah, that's
Northern
definitely where
California centric.
he was. Definitely in Northern California when he was collecting, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he sent me this stuff, And of course, I'm sending pictures to you because I'm like, well, what does all this mean? It's like this stuff is, and Dan's like, it's really good stuff. Like, get it. Like,
Get this stuff.
yeah,
Figure it the F out.
yeah. Because I
Make
remember
sure
thinking,
you
I was
get
like,
this stuff.
I remember thinking there was like 4 or 5 things I'd been looking for, and I was like, well, maybe I should make an offer on those things. And I think you said, find out what he wants for the everything.
Get it all.
Find out what he wants for everything, which is, of course, the smartest piece of advice ever. Because that was probably 12 or 13 years ago now when that happened.
Really? Is that when it was?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably like 12 years ago. And
so 2008 or so.
Yeah, there are things. I think it was 2009, actually.
Okay, great.
So I'll never forget because there were so many things in there in the decade plus since I've never seen. Still to this day, so much stuff.
It was a crazy collection.
Yeah, it was a crazy collection.
Because everything in that collection was stuff that everybody always threw away. Cereal boxes have survived because there's a lot of company finds, and they survive because they're a certain size, and we've had some kids save some collections. But this kind of stuff, there was just a lot of really interesting pieces of true ephemera, which is, ephemera is, stuff that was meant to be thrown away and really did a good job of being thrown away.
Yeah, and he also, because he had a visual eye, and he was taking care of it. Yeah, he was taking care of it like he was collecting. He was actively. He wasn't like it didn't get thrown in the back of a wall or something. No, he collected. I have often said, if I could have dreamed of being a collector when I was a kid and having saved candy stuff, he basically did what I would have done. Like he saved it in perfect condition. So I got all that stuff, and as I was going through it, one of the things I'll often tell people about where I'm at now. As I said, look, when I started, if you wanted to look at old candy packaging, there wasn't a lot online. There were maybe a few hundred images, and it was all 2 people. It was all from 2 different people. It was Dan Goodsell's Imaginary World website. That's where you could see some vintage candy, and then Darlene Lacey's The Candy Wrapper Museum. Yeah. And that was pretty much it. Maybe you'd see some stuff on some YouTube commercials or whatever, but there was really nothing out there. So when I started publishing my stuff, but then when I got this crazy collection, then I was able to really, over the last 15 years, I've published over 10,000 pieces,
Oh, wow.
So it's crazy. But that collection, it was that collection, and you and I talking about it and going through it. And I thought to myself, this is so significant, and no one's really planted a flag on vintage candy before. And I thought, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could be the candy guy. And so, because it seemed like a very untrodden path, like it almost seemed like a sort of open, I could sort of go out and do it. Because no one was collecting it, the stuff wasn't expensive. At the time, there wasn't a lot of competition. There's a little more now, but there's still not a lot. It's not like collecting baseball cards or comic books.
Sure.
But it was very easy to sort of go down into it to a point where, it just sort of grew. And then I started not just buying vintage stuff. I started buying current things because I wanted to keep up on what was new. And that, I think, me buying current stuff, I wasn't doing a lot of it, but then Lifesavers changed their logo for like a year to this very weird modern logo. They would eventually change it back. Actually, I guess they left it around for a few years. But the first time they had changed the logo in any significant way in like 100 years. So I was like, I'll buy some of those. And I bought a few things,
that's what started you going to the stores and buying
the new stuff. Yeah.
What is current.
Yeah. And then that became a more important part of my work because it was very minor. And now I'm trying to keep up with everything that comes out. And so my archives not only have the stuff I've gotten that can go back 100 years, but it's every single candy package released over the last 10, which is ridiculous and insane, but also kind of fun. So, yeah.
So I guess the last sort of question to answer, even though it won't be the last question to answer.
Wait, can I say one more thing?
Sure,
Sorry.
Of course.
Going back to the blog. So I was publishing a lot of stuff on Flickr.
Started in 2000. So say
2008, 2009. Yeah, right around there.
Yeah.
So I was posting a lot of things to Flickr. And so I would kind of post them as soon as I would get them. If I got a hot tamales box, I'd scan it, post it that day. If I got a Clark bar wrapper the next day, I'd scan it, post it that day, like a vintage Clark bar wrapper. When I got that collection, I was posting a lot, steadily trying to get through it all. There were I think in the Monk Tiki collection, there were 780 pieces. I published all 780 pieces. You know, I mean, there's actually its own album there. So I was doing all that stuff, but there wasn't any cohesion to it. So you could find a Hot Tamales box here, but then you find a different one over here. And because most of that stuff, you couldn't see it anywhere else. Like the only image of a lot of those things were the ones I was publishing. Friends of mine who were bloggers, they would blog about it. And I would see like, oh, wow, they blogged about it. Look at all the people that's coming. No one's coming on my things.
Yes.
It's like, maybe I should launch a blog. I launched the blog because I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to do a book, and which I still haven't done, but I'm very close to it. I've actually been in publishing meetings now about it, but so it'll probably happen in the next year and a half. But I wanted to do a book, but I had the idea of doing a book just seemed overwhelming. So I said, well, if I do a blog, I can just do, I'll do a couple blog posts every once in a while, and then after a year, I'll have an outline for a book. But then over like 3.5 years, I published like 600 articles and 6,000 pictures. And, you can't, trying to put that into a book is impossible. But so it was partially for that. And I also wanted to bring an editorial cohesion to it. So I was able to speak to things in a different way. And the more I did that, the more I became interested in the history, how things fit together, why things changed, and how they relate to what's going on. So it's funny, as I made those choices, I became more interested in certain things. Like when I would find, I've had the benefit or the luck of finding a couple other collections over the years that I've tracked down through arcane means, but I've seen the things they collected. Like at one point for current material, I'd be like, I just need an example of the wrapper. But then I would find in this collection, you'd have the king size wrapper and they look cool and different. So I need to go out now, I need to buy all the king size wrappers. And so it becomes this thing when you see how it all fits together. You sort of want to make sure you keep that going. And so that's one of the things. So in 2012, I said, I want to have my own voice out there, bringing this material, rather than leaving up to these other bloggers to sort of take my stuff and put it together however they want. I want to be the guy to bring it together. And so that was sort of the driving choice behind that.
And was there a kind of learning curve on how you initially started, and it seemed like you sort of slowed down in 2018 with the blog.
Oh yeah.
A learning curve of you and your writing.
Yeah.
Because I always think that sort of this are you happy that you sort of forced yourself to do this blog and started to contextualize this? Did this help you contextualize what you care about in this whole process?
That's a great way to put it. I mean, I launched with because I spent a year sort of interviewing and trying to track down information on Big League Chew. I got wrappers from you, from that gum book. I tracked down Rob Nelson, who I would eventually become friends with. He's the ball player who invented Big League Chew. I was talking to people at Wrigley, but I spent a year doing one blog post, right? So it was this very long thing that I launched. And it was one of those things where I had interviewed people, I had notes and stuff. And 8 months into that process, maybe I'm never going to launch this blog. Maybe I'm never actually going to do it. I keep talking about it. So I did it. And then I was doing smaller things. But then as the blog went on, and maybe because I had more material, but I also just started to build these thematic posts. And whereas originally it's like, the blogging will be easy. I'll write up a blog in an afternoon and post it. But then it became like I'm working for like days on a single blog post, because just even bringing, like I did a hot tamales feature that had 40 or 50 different hot tamales packaging. So just doing the graphics for those took me like 8 hours, just trying to get them all sized right and done. And so it became, my editorial sort of presentation became stronger, I think, as I went on. I wanted them to be complete editorial packages. Each post, I wanted it to be a complete editorial package with a beginning, a middle, and an end to a degree. And I wanted them to have a statement, sort of defining statement, or at least a sort of theme. And then I was really doing a lot of that stuff. And then 2018 is when, I think the TV show People Came the first time or whatever. Mm-hmm. And we started developing that. And I sort of okay, I had less time or less focus maybe. And it became more challenging. So I think at around 600 posts, it became harder and harder for me to sort of bring the time and energy to that focus to work on it.
So you sort of feel like the blog kind of encapsulated a whole sort of way of thinking. And then let's talk about the TV show for a couple minutes at least. What was the title? What was the title of the show?
That show was called Food Flashback. Yes, that was the final title, because it had like 4 titles. I'm like, it was Food Flashback, of course. Food Flashback. I wasn't crazy about the name, but I do like alliteration, so it worked. Yeah, it was interesting because that happened. I'm going to get my years wrong, but I know that at a point in March of a year, probably 2016, 2017, within 3 weeks, I was contacted by 3 different production companies looking for ideas. And they thought, oh, this guy's a candy guy
Based on the blog.
based on the blog. Yeah.
There it
And I'd
is.
been interviewed by some press or whatever. I was in a thing
Sure.
that got repeated on Esquire.com, whatever. There was some press out there, but not a ton. I'd done some like regional television appearances around Halloween or whatever. They'd stream me in through Skype. Um, but so over those 3 weeks, one of them seemed really promising for a Food Network show, and then I was talking to them, and then it never really went anywhere. And that was it. And I thought, oh, there was my chance to be on TV, whatever, to have my own show, which was a sort of childhood dream. I always wanted to do like 3-2-1 contact or like be on Zoom as a kid. I was one of those kids. I was like, I want to do that. I want to go out and go places and show how things are made. I want to go to the farm, ride a horse. So I think was it even later that year? Was it toward the end of that exact same year? I don't think it was the following year. So around October, November, I got contacted by someone else. It's like, hey, we're interested in maybe, what you do. And what it was a producer's intern. They were looking for ideas for shows, right? And the producer's intern said, what do you think about this guy? He calls himself a candy historian. It's me. And that was because of my blog. And or was it because I'm on YouTube? I'd done like 6 YouTube. I was trying to do more YouTube stuff at that point.
Okay.
And I'd done maybe like 6 or 7 when they came. And so I went in. I interviewed with some hotshot development consultant of theirs. This woman, Caroline Christopher, I think was her name. Fantastic. Takes me out to lunch. Talks about what I do. Asks me lots of questions. And of course, it's like, well, can you go out and search for this stuff? Because we have a show where we're following you around looking for vintage candy. I said that's not going to work.
Oh, thank you.
I said that this is how I always describe it, because I've had other people say this. It's like, look, you can do Toy Hunter and set up things where you go out and do things. But if you're talking about vintage packaging hunter, I said, trying to find old food packaging is like trying to find lost Andy Warhol sketches. Yes, there probably is an Andy Warhol sketch in someone's attic, but you ain't going to find it. That's it. Like there's an old SpaghettiOs can label or an old cereal box. You're just not going to find it. There's not a show there. But so I ended up working with 411 Productions, and I met with them. We started coming up with some thoughts and ideas, and it was really interesting because they were already dealing with, I want to say, was it Travel Channel? Yeah, I think it was Travel Channel.
I think that's what I said.
Yeah, Travel Channel is where we originally pitched it, and the original thing was they wanted me to have a co-host.
Oh.
And so I called up an old friend of mine from Marvel who was not a host, was not an actor, but he was very funny, a guy named Greg Schiegel. And he was always just so hilarious. And I think he was like half Cuban, half Jewish. And so he had this sort of like Seinfeldian, he was like just wit about him. He was like very sharp and very funny. And I always thought, oh, this guy is effortlessly funny. So what we did was I went to his place and we recorded. Did we record it live with them? We recorded like a little Skype call with the production company. Where it was just he and I are talking. And, Greg didn't know about vintage junk food or anything like that, but he likes to eat. And so we talked about that kind of stuff. So we had a banter, which was great. That's what I knew we could get. And they thought it was great. They showed it to the people at Travel. And the person at Travel said, wow, I could see myself kicking up on my fuzzy slippers and enjoying watching these guys talk. Right. So that was great. That was the first step. Then they said, okay, we're going to give you money to shoot a proof of concept. So at that point, Travel Channel said, we're going to write a check for like $15,000 or $20,000. Go out and shoot like a 5-minute, ostensible version of what your show would be. This is with the production company. So we were about to do that. There were a lot of crazy things going on in my life. My mother was sick. She was like in a coma, and then like crazy. I had to leave town. My friend Greg, who's amazing, but decided like he was working for Nickelodeon at that point, freelance. He had all these deadlines because he worked on the Nickelodeon comic. I think it was that. I also think it was like he just decided he didn't want to be on camera. He
didn't want to be a camera guy.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so I was like, listen, we had 3 days. We had a 3-day shoot to shoot this proof of concept. I said, listen, we can get you down, so you just have to come up for 4 hours. And he said, I can't do it. I can't do it. No. And so I'm freaked out because I'm already going through all this personal trauma and turmoil what I'm trying to deal with, because I actually had to delay the shoot to go home to maybe say goodbye to my mother in the hospital. Right? She survived. Thank God she's still here. But it was a very horrible personal time with just all this crazy stuff going on. But the network was so lovely. They said, listen, you take care of your family. We will reschedule when you get back. The production company was great. Travel Channel was great. Everyone was so kind, and they all had big hearts. They were all very human. There was no feeling of corporate, BS. They were all just very nice. Anyway, I came back. That's when my friend Greg just panicked and everything. And they said, you know what? Jason's really the guy we love. Just go out and shoot it with him. Right. So they went out and shot the proof of concept with me. And then once they saw what I could do in this little proof of concept, they're like, well, that's great. They take it into their Greenlight meeting. They love it. They then, this is all took like a couple of months, but it goes into the Greenlight meeting. Greenlight meetings, and this was Scripps Networks. Greenlight meetings where in Scripps is like HGTV, History Channel, Travel Channel, Food Network, Cooking Channel, all this stuff. Their executives from all those channels sit in on the Greenlight meetings for all the channels. So they all have a say on what every channel gets. They all weigh in. So we had this 7-minute proof of concept where I go and I talk about Twinkies, and we go to this place and have a deep fried Twinkie in Brooklyn. Then we go to the Museum of Food and I show like the whole assortment of Twinkies and people sample, whatever. Dopey but fun, charming. I talk a little bit about the history of Twinkies, and I have some old Twinkie packaging that I brought with me. That goes into this Greenlight meeting, and they said they loved it, and they wanted a Greenlight 2 series. Or no, not to series, excuse me, 2 pilot. They had only Greenlight to series. So they Greenlight to pilot, and which, of course, this is a huge, exciting call for me, right? This is, my God, we're actually going to shoot a pilot, and it's going to be aired. This is a dream come true again. This is like that Marvel call. You're going to work on the XMen. So we get that call, and we start setting up the schedule for that. And, at that point, we've decided we're going to go out and tell interesting stories. We're looking for a theme. I remember I went up to the Food Network offices, and I'm sitting there with the executives. We're trying to come up with theme for the first episode. We know this is going to be about old food, right? And we're going to sort of use your obsession with the brands and the old packaging and stuff to sort of open us into that world. But then we're going to try to tell stories, around this stuff. Because I said, look, it can be new stuff, it can be old stuff. And we came up with different themes. And one of the ones I pitched, I said, well, what about products that went away and came back? Because the Twinkies just went away and came back. That's something this is the other thing. The caveat was they wanted us to use what we already shot as one of the segments.
Oh, okay.
They said,
so you had to use the Twinkies.
They said the proof of concept was ready to air. They said, we could put this on the air right now. So we want you to use that and just add 2 more segments to it. I think it was 2. So I said, well, what can we take out of Twinkie that we can apply to the things I said, products that went away and came back? So we ended up doing Oreo O's cereal and the McRib, which went away but then comes back every so often.
Sure.
And the producers, this was all the production company. They got really great people to bring in, tell really interesting stories. They got the guy that created the McRib Locator website. I actually brought in the top secret recipe guy, who's a friend of mine who I had met through online. Todd, and he's fantastic. And so he came in and we recreated a McRib together, which was a lot of fun. And so we did all this stuff. And then the Surge guys, Surge Soda, which this amazing story of these guys who convinced Coca-Cola to bring Surge Soda back, which was a really great story. At one point, they even bought a billboard. And this is all very happy stuff. They bought a billboard in Atlanta, like where the president of Coke would see this billboard saying, please, the Surge movement wants you to bring back Surge, which I thought was very clever. So we shot this thing, and like this, these episodes of TV, they seem like they're nothing, but this thing had like a $200,000 budget or something,
Really?
It was crazy. I was like, I thought I had like a $50,000 budget. They're like, no, we're spending like $200,000 and all this. And I was like, what? At that point, you're thinking, wow, like I felt both very responsible and also sort of like, wow, I've actually managed to get to do something that is serious. This is serious. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'd never, I always knew I was working on special things when I worked on the XMen, but I felt very fortunate at that point. I wasn't making any of that money, but I didn't care about any of that. I didn't care about the money. And so, I got to go to a cereal factory, and then the crazy thing was when I started, I'll never forget our showrunner, we were out shooting that proof of concept probably in March of that year. I'll never forget, we're driving around, just shooting the proof of concept. He goes, yeah. He goes, well, what do you want to do? What's your deal? And I was like, I'd love to host a show. And he goes, yeah, well, I shoot a lot of these sizzle reels. Most of them don't go anywhere. And I was like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. But so I was very, I guess, realistic early on in that process, of that year process, where I was like, well, I guess, look, they do a lot of these things. All I can do is do the best I can and hope. But once we had shot in North Carolina, and then we had shot in Minnesota, and we had shot in New York and New Jersey. Oh, wow. But once we shot the entire show and they were starting to cut it together, and even while we were shooting, I sort of started to hear these things. The production company, the cameraman would say, oh, this is pretty good. This is good stuff. This is interesting. This is fascinating. People are going to love this. And then like that development consultant that had first interviewed me, she had worked on all this stuff. She'd come from NBC News. She'd worked on all these reality TV shows. She goes, this was after they had really gotten close to a final cut. She goes, I saw a cut of the show. And she was like, oh yeah. She's not a friend of mine. She was, you're going to go to series. I was like, wow. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, no. So I was like, okay. So then my producer, who is just under the guy who owns the production company, they had put it all together. They had all viewed it, their team there. They had been sending me copies. They all viewed it. And then when they turned it over, they basically took a final cut and they hand it over. They digitally send it over to the network. And he sent it over the network for final edits, adding on the key things for the network and stuff. But he said, the president of the company, the owner, the founder of the production company said, listen, he goes, I've been in this business 25 years. He goes, we've done hundreds of shows. He goes, I've never been more sure of a show. He goes, if this doesn't go to series, we got to close up shop. My producer of the show took that quote and told me that on the phone, right? And he's still a close friend of mine as well. Like, he's like one of my favorite people. So I'm thinking, this is it, man. Because I looked at it and I was like, I thought I could do this. I thought I could host a show like that. But when I saw how they made me look, I was like, oh, I look like I couldn't believe how good I looked. Like how much I sounded like I should be on TV talking about things, right? I thought, wow, I look really professional. I didn't think I'd look that good. I thought I'd look probably more like what I'm looking like now, But they really did right by me. They got me to look fantastic. So I was optimistic, to say the least, right? I was like, my life's about to change, And I was like, this is it. This is, and this is what all the struggles have been for, because over those years, because this is now, I'd been out of the comic book business 17 years. I'd almost been up for that Spike TV show. I had a TV movie in development that I'd written with a partner for Disney TV. That was like a year of my life. So all these things that we didn't touch upon, but these things had happened and almost happened. So I was like, this is it.
Everything chews up a year, chews up 2 years. And you're all like,
I said, all the struggle has led to this. This is my dream coming true. Right? And it still was, because we got to make a full episode of a show. It went out nationwide. Like everybody I ever knew, I got to tell about it, right? And they watched it and stuff. And if they didn't, shame on them. And then the ratings came in, and the ratings were decent, respectable. And they went into the final Greenlight meeting in December. And
December of what year? 18?
I think this is December 17. I think at 17. This point.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. It's hard to believe it's been that long. It's a very fresh wound yet.
Yeah.
But so I was back, and this is the year that my mother was in a coma. So she's now recovered mostly. And I'm back for the holidays. She and I are shopping for her granddaughters for, sometime that I'm with her, and she's got her oxygen now and everything. But we're walking through this mall in Norfolk, Nebraska, and we're talking. And I get the call from my producer. And I get the call, and I've been waiting for this call, right? Because we're waiting for the Greenlight meeting. I get this call. He's like, hey, Jason, how are you? And I'm like, good. And I'm waiting. I'm waiting for my good news, right? I'm going to run just like I did when I was 25 and I ran laps. I'm going to run through this mall like a crazy person. He goes, well, there's no easy way to say this. And I'm thinking, he's pulling my leg. I actually thought that in my head. He's pulling my leg. Right? He goes, they passed on the show. And I was like, oh. And he goes, I'm not, I'm serious. He goes, and it would later turn out, I don't know exactly what happened in that meeting, but one of the executives,
here we go,
really thought that he said, there's no way we can get multiple seasons out of this. And I'm like, did he think the show was just about food that had gone away and come back? Because it's not what the fucking theme of the show is, pardon my language. It's like the show's about just food. I mean, it's about junk food. It's about, and it's like, we get 10 years of this easy. This is easy. So that happened. And I would talk to the development person who then, during this process, she became the development, not of just travel, she became the development of all of scripts, right? So she got a big promotion while she was working on our show. I asked her, I said, like 6 months later, I said, what happened? What did we miss? Was it me? Was it the show? Just be honest. That's all I want. Because I was sort of having the same conversation I had with Bob Wayne. I said, listen, I know you already filled those jobs, but a year from now, I want to make sure I'm the guy who gets them, right? So I was like, listen, I still want to do this. So I want to make sure what was wrong, with the process. And she goes, we can get together, but I can tell you this, I'll cut to the chase right now. It wasn't because of anything you did. You were amazing. It wasn't because the show wasn't great. What does that mean? And you know,
Oh wait, so her answer was there is no answer. It's
she
the no
goes, yeah,
answer
she goes,
answer.
there's stuff, but she goes, it's nothing you did. You did everything exactly right. The show was great. You know, she goes, there was nothing you could have done better than what you did. She goes, you nailed it. It was a fantastic show. And I'm like, okay. Okay.
Well, I guess it's like that, that perfect album, not perfect, like when somebody puts out a great album and nobody buys it. It's
Yeah, of
like
course.
it just for whatever reason
Yeah.
it didn't resonate. Well, it's even, I mean, but you're dealing with that executive room,
Yeah.
and that executive room makes decisions sometimes based on things that you can't understand.
Well, and we talked about it beforehand with the producers my producers at 411 who had been through this process, right? This was all a new process. I'd never been through I'd never been waiting on a call from a Greenlight meeting, but they had been through them dozens or hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And he was saying, look, he goes, the problem is someone could hate Twinkies and that could be it, because they hate Twinkies. But yeah, you always knew that these things happened. You always knew that there was great product. And look, I do think it was great product. You always thought there was great television that didn't get a chance. Or there was stuff I loved, TV wise, certainly movie wise, that didn't make money, that failed. That I thought, oh man, I wish they wouldn't have canceled that show. And look, it wasn't all that, but I thought it was a really nice piece of quasi reality TV. For this kind of show, I thought there was a place for it. So it was a huge heartbreak for me. But at the same time, it's sort of adjacent to the professional heartbreak and the creative heartbreak, because it was both. It was professional and creative. There was very much, and again, this sort of tells you a little bit about me. There was very much this sort of adjacent feeling of, my God, how lucky was I? Because when I pitched a TV show to Disney for a year, musical TV show, a musical monster TV show, which would have been so much fun. At the end of that process, when they said no, that was it. So I walk away. If I'm telling a friend the story, they're like, what do you have to show for it? Well, nothing. I could just be a dopey guy making up a story, right?
Sure.
But when I finally actually got to make something, we got to make it, it got edited, we worked on it, we revised it, and it got aired. So it went out, it was, and now I can show someone this thing. I said, look, I made it, I think it's really good. I think it shows that I can do something, other than talk about
it is a good piece of resume.
Yeah.
And so that takes us to what will be the final question. What next? Where are you going to take us candy wise?
Well, it's interesting. The world, I think, regarding like candy and certainly junk food and everything, I think driven by Instagram, right? By people wanting to experience things and share things. I think almost the way geek culture became mainstream with the help of Marvel movies and everything else, and just maybe the internet as well, and people being able to access and keep in touch with these things easier. Like the internet really broke down a lot of barriers to entry to fandom, whereas you used to have to work for things. I remember as a kid, I literally mailed away and sent like $2 for a Twilight Zone episode guide that someone had typed up and photocopied, right? This is because you couldn't get it otherwise. Now,
because the book hadn't come out yet.
The book, that's right. Because there was a great book that had the episode guide too. Yeah,
it's real nice.
The book hadn't come out. So I had sort of seen that same thing start to happen with junk food and the love of candy and even the history of it. And I'd like to think, at least appreciating the history of it was partially because of the work I've been doing over the last decade, right? Trying to share all this stuff. So, I became more active on Instagram, and I still want to keep doing what I'm doing and trying to find new ways to tell those stories, because I still think, as much as people are talking about it, or like when a comic book blog or podcast talks about junk food, I don't think they're still getting into it the way that I know I can get into it, because I've interviewed those people, I've told those stories. So look, I'd still love to get back on. I'd still love to do a TV show. I'd still love to do more well-produced video, but I want to do a podcast. And right now I'm in the process of talking with people about doing podcasts, talking to Audible and other people there. And I've got a partner we're developing things with. We're working on a book. I've been in meetings with Abrams Books, who publish some really great books, and there's some obstacles there, but we're trying to figure out how to get around those. And so, yeah, I what I want to really do is I want to celebrate this material. I want to celebrate the history of it. I want to preserve it as much as possible. I always say the history of bubble gum, or the history of chocolate bars, or the history of candy, or penny candy, or whatever, the history of going to that Woolworths aisle. It's not the history of civil rights, right? It's not the most important thing in our lives, or it's not the thing we should be making everyone study. But it's fascinating, and it's fun, and it's light, and it's a nice escape, And so I want to keep sort of being a person who forwards that love of it. And, I'm not trying to get people to do what I do, which is collect candy wrappers. It's a very strange thing to do. I don't think I'm not trying to like create a hobby around collecting candy or anything like that. I'm trying to celebrate it because everyone loves candy, at least most people do. And, and I want to be that guy who continues to make that fun and to create a venue for that, and a voice for that. Because the one thing I know is there's not that many people who need to own an old box of Runts, right?
Full box of Runts.
Full box
from
of
the Willy
Runts,
Wonka candies.
or an old Snow Caps box. All these things are sitting on my desk right now. Or a beautiful old fruit stripe wrapper, right? This guy.
Ooh,
that's nice.
Boy,
But there's millions of people, or at least tens of thousands of people, who would love to see it for about 60 seconds.
Yeah,
that's
always been the thing. When I started, you don't expect the world to be as obsessed with this stuff as we are, but there's so many people out there that want to get that little rush of enjoying it for that second, and then they can move on to whatever they move on to. Right. I'm going to still have it all around me.
It's there's so much value. People say, what's the stuff? Is the stuff worth anything? I said, look, to me, I'm not going to look. I don't want to give it away unless I'm donating it to the Smithsonian or something. I convince those people to take it or whatever, do something good with it. But it's not like I consider it valueless. But to me, the real value comes in the sharing. It's like when you can share it and have people have a moment, and you don't get too many comments. But when I get comments back on my blog or even on Instagram, those are really nice to hear. It's nice to share an experience, and share that relationship to the material, and and it does go on multiple levels. Like I'm interviewing a guy right now who'd worked in the candy business for 40 years, and I want to tell his story, and I think when people read that will connect on different levels. It'll connect on career levels, family levels, on brand levels, on nostalgia levels, but it can work, storytelling can work on all different sorts of ways, but sharing it more, doing more of the kinds of things. So, and hopefully I'm on the right path now to do more of that,
Well, thanks, Jason, for
Thank you, Dan.
sharing a bunch of your stories. Lots of ones I've never heard before, which is great.
Good.
Hopefully a lot of stories. I'm assuming anybody that watches this is going to hear a lot of stories that they've never heard.
Hopefully.
And thanks for being the first guest on my show. And, we'll probably have you back at some point because I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you and I haven't. We have a lot more to say. You have a lot more to say, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And thanks for being on.
It's always a pleasure, Dan. Thank you.
Bye. Okay, well, that was wonderful. I want to thank Jason for doing that and being my first guest on this show. In the future shows, I'm going to talk to other people I know and try and delve down into that childhood stuff. Those formative years where things really influence us. And I think there's a lot of connections that you don't sort of think about in your life that can be tied back to those early stores where you shopped, things you looked at, movies you saw, those real seminal influences that sort of continue to play out in our lives without maybe us knowing it all the time. Thanks, and hopefully I'll see you next time.